back, boxing fans, to another great show with Sean Unboxing. It never takes long for some clowns to come out with their racially motivated boxing content, right? Like, it's ironic that people that accuse everyone else of being racist literally come out with racially motivated videos to basically shit on non-black fighters consistently, whether they're coming out hating on, in this case, Lomachenko, whether it's Canelo Alvarez, whether it's Bivol, Beterbiev, Usyk, Golovkin, Kovalev, Roman Gonzalez. I mean, the list is just way too fucking long. But this is consistent, right? Imagine if somebody was doing the same thing consistently, shitting on black fighters and just putting them through a routine, a rotation like this. Like, literally, you have boxing to talk about this weekend. One of the potentially most highly acclaimed young black American fighters is actually fighting this weekend in a unification fight. Yes, a unification fight, something we're still waiting for Tank Davis to do, right? But we'll give Tank a pass because that's fine, because he is black, so he's held to a lower standard. But Boots Ennis is literally fighting this weekend in a really great fight. And the guy that's all about supporting black American fighters, he's more interested in making a video shitting on Vasily Lomachenko, a 37-year-old fighter who obviously is not going to be around that much longer in the boxing world. A guy who, from what we hear, has a injured back, which is the reason why he's been not fighting recently and why he's talked about potentially retiring. He also talked about retiring after the Kambosos win. So, you know, the potential of him retiring is not a surprise. What we anticipate is Raymond Muratalla potentially fighting for the vacant IBF title when it's finally announced that Lomachenko is going to retire. Or is Lomachenko going to come back and fight Tank Davis later on this year, which could be another possibility. We have to wait and see. Imagine how bad this looks if Lomachenko does come back and fights Tank Davis in the fourth quarter of 2025. Then this take is what it always is: racially motivated hate speech, because that's what it is, hate speech. We've seen this so many times from clowns like this, so it's not a shock, it's not a surprise. I'm obviously a Lomachenko fan. I would love to see him fight 2, 3, 4 more times. But I also understand that in sports, injuries, wear and tear, when you've been fighting since you're a little kid, you know, it's hard for your body, especially after you pass 30 years old, to keep going, especially at this high level. I mean, if you played sports, you remember when you turned 30 years old and people talked about how hitting 30 was going to really be something you noticed. And it is, consistently. So you can imagine a guy who's pushing 40, but yet in a sport that is elite, right? Where you're like elite level. Obviously, it's very tough and it's a toll. Not just the fights, it's mostly the build-up, the training, and everything that leads into the fights, which is probably one reason why Errol Spence is nowhere to be seen as well, right? Even though we've heard about him coming back and fighting ever since he got knocked out by Terence Crawford. So we will see what happens with him. Inevitably, I expect to see him sometime down the road, but the question is when. With Lomachenko, it may be a similar situation. But I hope he comes back. I'd love to see him against any of the top young fighters at 135 pounds a few more times before his inevitable retirement from the sport. But if he doesn't, so be it. There's always the new guy that comes around. There's always the new fighter to follow. There's always the new fighter to support. That's the thing when you've been supporting sports and athletes for decades. You expect them to eventually retire and leave the game. So it doesn't shock you. It doesn't hurt you. It's not the end of the world when these things happen. But with a dude like this, it's all about race. If anybody was to make a video like this, talking about a black American fighter, you know the response video would be quick and it'd be pointing fingers like crazy. It's kind of like how Carmel Anthony, that kid, just recently killed that young kid at a track and field event. And if the colors were reversed, you could imagine the outrage in the black community. You can understand how this dude would have made multiple videos being critical towards white people attacking and, hurting black people, because we've already heard that narrative a lot of times. But because the shoe's on the other foot, now, of course, the excuses are coming out, right? The excuse is that obviously this guy shouldn't be held accountable for his actions. But unfortunately, in the world we live in, you're held accountable for what you do. And that's just the norm. And it's unfortunate that two young kids basically have just lost their life, because that's what happens. One rash decision has really ruined the lives of two kids. And if you want to make it a race thing, you're going to make it a race thing. But it's more than that. It's two young guys who basically lost their lives and lost their futures. And that's sad and unfortunate. And this is no different. You ask yourself, what's the motivation to shit on one of the most highly regarded amateur fighters in boxing history, a fighter who came into the pro game, literally was elite at the 130-pound division, so much so that all the other champions blatantly ducked him, including Tank Davis, was making fighter after fighter after fighter after fighter no mas, right? Literally pulling back the whole Duran situation from 1980s, right? When Duran obviously no mas against Sugar Ray Leonard. And Lomachenko did that to 3-4 fighters in a row until he was no longer able to get elite competition. None of the other champions wanted to step up and face him at his best weight, which was 130 pounds, which forced him to move to 135, where he became a 3-belt unified champion. Obviously missing out on Undisputed by losing to Lopez, and then obviously later on ended up losing to it with a controversial decision to Devin Haney. But those losses are not a need to be critical or hateful. What he is doing is what other fighters have never dared to do, right? When we talk about Tank Davis and the criticism he gets, it's because he's never dared to put himself in those positions. So he never lost because he's never challenged himself to be great. Lomachenko may have been overly confident. He might have been egotistical. He may have been too proud. But for elite athletes, this is not a surprise. It's not a shock. That's how you become great, by being confident, by feeling that you are the best, right? At the end of the day, he's had a great pro career. He had a great amateur career. He's a future Hall of Famer. And there you are. I mean, the hate is nonsensical and unnecessary, because Lomachenko was never hateful towards his opponents, never hateful towards the other boxers in the sport. And in truth, his fans weren't either. Most of the time, his fans have needed to defend him primarily because he was white. And because he was white, obviously he was overrated, a hype job, media created, not as good as a black American fighter. But let me know what you think about this type of content, because this is really what happens to the YTBC. This inevitably is the kind of content that consistently gets pushed. And I'll keep pointing it out, calling it out, and putting flags on it, because that's what I'm here for. Whether you like it or not, the Trump of the YTBC is calling shit out. If this thing would